My name is Jason Belzer, and I'm here for Athletic Director U, and we have an esteemed panel of head men's basketball and women coaches to discuss pertinent social issues in the space of college basketball and college sports. Today, I am joined by Russ Turner, head coach at UC Irvine. To his left is Zenarae Antione, who is the head women's coach at Texas State University, and to her left is Anthony Stewart, the head coach at UT Martin. So let's start with you, Anthony. If we look at the statistics that we see in college athletics, over 50% of male student athletes are or identify as minorities. In basketball, that number is even higher. It's upwards of 60 to 70%. When we look at the rates of head coaches that identify as minorities, it's substantially lower. It's in the area of about 25% in total in Division I, and when you look at it on the Power 5 level, it's even lower. It's about 17 or 18%. So there literally are only a handful of head coaches that identify as minorities on the Power 5 level. What do you think the issues are around that? Why do we see such a lack of minority head coaches on the men's side of the game?
Well, Jason, I think that the first thing that institutions need to do, they need to identify that diversity and being inclusive is something that's important to their university and institution, upon which they have to have a decision maker in place who's going to adhere to that mission statement. I was looking, I think it was last month, to kind of go into this question. It was 10% or less than 10% of FBS football athletic directors or athletic directors at FBS universities, institutions, are minorities. And so the people that are making these decisions, it's kind of like a trickle-down theory. You know, the higher you go up, the less minorities are represented. And so that is a institutional problem. It needs to be looked at, and why is that happening? I think if you look at the numbers and the stats and the percentages, they don't lie. They tell a story of what's going on in college athletics as a whole, just not basketball. And so once you identify, you know, what the problem is and how do you find a solution? You know, and I don't have the answer. I just know that there are many qualified people of color, women, who probably deserve a second look or a long look at being an athletic director. You have to fix that problem, because those are people to hire at the end of the day. I mean, we can sit here and talk about the lack of coaches, but who's hiring those coaches, or who's not hiring a specific coach?
So a few months ago, you received a phone call from another Division I head coach, and he was seeking a reference on an assistant that had previously worked for you. And he said that, or he asked, do you believe that this coach would make a good minority assistant coach, or fill his minority assistant position? And you kind of took a little bit of a affront to that in the way that he phrased it. Why do you think that logic is of looking at assistant coaches and instead of saying, let's hire the best guy that I can, looking at him as a checking a box? And do you think, and I would pose the same question to you, Russ, do you think that a lot of young minority assistant coaches get labeled as just a recruiter, as just a certain type of position coach, and because of that, they have difficulty in landing head coaching jobs later on in their career?
You know, that's a two-part question. The first part, you know, when I received that phone call, my first responsibility is to correct him. And so I said, you know, I was professional about it. And I'm not necessarily saying it was his fault. He was just being honest. So I had to be honest with him in retrospect. I said, well, other than being black or African American, what are the other characteristics or responsibilities for the job? And he just kind of, you know, there was this dead silence on the phone, and you know, he had to hurry up and get off the phone. But the point is, I think that a lot of people, or what has happened over decades and periods of time, people of color have accepted that. And, you know, I got a lot of texts, oh, you know, well, you know, you didn't help get the guy the job, or you know, you could have got another minority a position. Well, I'm not sure that's the position that they wanted. To move on to your second question, yes, black assistants do get labeled as recruiters. Well, you know, I know that for a fact because it's happened to me. And so I'm always a proponent of, you know, and I spoke at your first consortium in San Antonio, and the first thing that I asked the panel and, you know, or the people that were listening, let me have a show of hands for anyone who is not being developed professionally, not being given scouts, important scouts, not the non-D1 scouts. Show of hands of the people that are not coaching every day and that are not involved in your program, and, you know, black or white. And, you know, there was a large number of hands, and I said, well, the best advice that I can give you, in particular, if you look like me, leave. Get yourself another job, because you're not in a situation that is going to get you where you're trying to go. And, you know, you have to be careful. A lot of people want to work in this business. You know, a lot of people want to, you know, you always hear want a foot in the door, want an opportunity at Division I. But you really need to be careful as to who you work for, because it becomes guilt by association. So what people believe or feel about your boss is exactly what they're going to think or feel about you.
Sure. Russ, do you have any input on that subject?
Yeah, relative to minority assistants getting labeled as recruiters, you know, I think that there's some of that's probably an outdated idea. That's not something that's been modeled by the coaches that I've worked for, or that I think that I've modeled in my staff. Anthony touched on most of our responsibilities as head coaches. We need to develop our staff members as head coaches. We got to turn them into head coaches, help them become head coaches by getting them to participate in all aspects of our program. We all have some staff specialization, but I think that if you label any guy on your staff as just this or that, you're not giving your staff the best chance to be as good as it can be, or any of your coaches the chance to be as good as they can be. So those would be missed opportunities.
Sure. You bring it up a little bit, Russ. Zenarae, while there are significantly more minority head coaches on the women's side of the game, what we see is that they get fired at much higher rates. In fact, minority women are 6 times more likely to be fired than to get another head coaching job on the women's basketball side of the business. Why do you think that is? And can both men's and women's sitting head coaches do better jobs of preparing their assistant coaches to be successful head coaches themselves one day?
Goes exactly to what Anthony was saying, and the answer to the last question is for sure yes. There's a lot more we can do as head coaches, but when you consider the fact that because a lot of African American women and men in the women's business are labeled as recruiters, and I've also gotten very similar conversations myself before with colleagues that call, there's a lack of opportunity for them to actually get into the X's and O's, lack of opportunity to get into what it means to help an administration. That lack of opportunity doesn't necessarily help prepare you. So then when you do get your first head coaching job, you literally are thrown into the fire, and you don't have you know, the experience to fall back on. And a lot of times then you're going to call your colleagues to try to navigate those waters. And by the time you figure it out, it may or may not be too late.
So why don't we see more women's coaches coaching on the men's side? There's obviously a bit of controversy this year with head coach Muffin McGraw in Notre Dame, where she said that she would never hire another male to her staff, primarily because she wanted to give women more opportunities. Z, do you see anything wrong with that? And Anthony and Russ, would you ever consider hiring a woman to your staff potentially?
Well, my vantage point's a little bit different. For the majority of my career as an assistant coach, I've been the only woman on staff. And so my viewpoint might be a little bit different. I've had both males, I've had all women staff, but I've generally kept a male on my staff, not necessarily because I needed to fill any kind of a male quota, but I just really thought that coach was a great coach, and they either brought the energy or the needs that I had. You know, a lot of people who know me know this. Jackie Robinson's one of my favorite athletes of all time. And as you think through what's going on in men's athletics and the lack of opportunity for women, again, I go back to just opportunity. If an opportunity is given, I think they're going to show that they can do it. You know, I was blessed to be able to play with Becky Hammond. I had an opportunity to go watch practices down there in San Antonio. And I understand, you know, Popovich gave her an opportunity. You know, Branch Rickey gave Jackie an opportunity. If there's an opportunity given, I think you're going to find head coaches or people in positions to make decisions. They're not making a decision because they are trying to be splashy. I think they're truly making a decision because they really feel that person is good. And they're going to be able to make that type of a change within their program. And when you speak to women being in the locker room, well, you know, I've got men on my staff. There's certain protocol that you follow, and you just kind of roll with it, and those young women accept it, and I think it's worked out really well. So, you know, I'm excited because I see that it's starting to happen. The thought process is there with men's coaches taking a look at some of the women on the women's side and considering hiring them. But obviously, I still think we have some major strides to make in that area.
How about Anthony or Russ?
You know, Jason, I see no problem with it. I have about 3 or 4 positions on my staff that I've still yet to hire for this coming season, and I've received several resumes of females. And so I've always thought, and again, my background being different, as you know, my job, probably my main job as a head coach at the level that I'm at, is to prepare my student athletes for the real world. And so there's nothing in my program that you're going to be able to do that you cannot do on a job, because the majority of my athletes are going to need jobs, and basketball is probably not going to be one of them. And part of that job is to be able to deal with, communicate with, interact with people that don't look like you and are of different genders. And so if I fail to put them in those positions and put them around those kind of people, I have therefore failed them for what lies ahead.
Russ?
Yeah, I'd absolutely consider hiring anybody who I thought could make our team or our program better. I haven't had a women's coach on my coaching staff, and I haven't had that modeled in my career when I think about it in college basketball. And I think college basketball on the men's side is slow to adapt. I think the women's basketball groups have adapted more quickly, and obviously the NBA has adapted more quickly with Becky Hammond. But if Greg Popovich has hired a women's coach, I think there's a great example for many of us to consider and follow. But in the NBA, there are less restrictions that we face in college. But every college coach that I know that's really good would hire anybody who he thought would best make his team improve.
Sure. You mentioned this concept of restrictions. What do you mean by that? I mean, is it an issue of having you know, females go on the road and go into a living room of a male student athlete and convince them?
No, not at all. Not at all. In general, players only care that the people they're working with care about them and are competent and work hard and give them a chance to be better. So I don't see any issues on that at all. What I mean is the restrictions on positions. In the NBA, staffs are unlimited. In college, we have strong restrictions on the number of coaches that we can have. On my staff, we have one of our most valuable players, or one of our most valuable staff members is a woman. She's our academic coordinator. So that's not the same as having a woman as a coach, but we have the additional expertise and different qualities that she brings that makes us better. I think it's those type of opportunities. The larger our staffs can be, the more diverse they can be.
Sure. Russ, you mentioned this, the fact that in the NBA, larger staffs allow for more opportunity, perhaps to take a chance on somebody. And what I've noticed in college sports in particular on the coaching side is that usually coaches hire people that they're comfortable with, that they've coached with somewhere, that somebody's given a good reference. But what that does, and we see that on the administrator side as well, it creates lack of opportunity for people because there may be many qualified women for you to hire as an assistant coach. You just don't know them. You're not interacting with them. You're not coaching with them against each other on a weekly basis. Yeah. How do we maybe resolve some of that? See, we see that on the women's side, there are many men's coaches. And so that interaction allows you to see somebody on the road, see what they do, see how they coach. How do we kind of start putting a wedge into the men's side of the business to make head coaches like Anthony and Russ consider hiring a woman?
I think one of the things, and I think this in general though about just assistant coaches in the women's game, is just going out and clinicking more on the men's side of the ball. A lot of us are in regions where we can drive 5 hours and maybe hit a couple different institutions up. Sitting down and talking with men's staffs to me is really important. Having that opportunity just so you can have that back and forth that we really enjoy, and them understanding and picking your brain and seeing, okay, that you really know your stuff, and then just getting a chance to know them as people as well, philosophically speaking. I think that's something that can be done as far as the women's game is concerned, is women getting out there and not just clinicking with other staffs in the women's game, but getting out there and truly clinicking, not sitting back and just watching a practice and taking down some notes, but sitting down for a few hours and talking shop, talking basketball. And so you can see, where there are some similarities, and you can learn from each other, because I'm sure both these men have sat down with, women on the women's side and found, wow, this is a really good coach. That really makes sense. Hey, I'm going to steal that idea. It's pretty cool. But those opportunities have to be present, and sometimes you have to make your own opportunity. And in the case of women's sports, specifically with assistant coaches, we really need to get out there and encourage them to get out there. And extend an olive branch to people in your area and say, hey, come to practice. Sit down with, my top defensive coach. Sit down with me. If there's something you want to talk about, let's talk shop.
So there's an argument by many sociologists that, particularly on the men's side of the business, it's over masculine, and we see that in a lot of different ways manifest itself. There are not many male student athletes, at least in men's basketball, have come out as gay. In the women's side of the business, it's a little bit more open in terms of head women's basketball coaches and assistants coming out and saying that they're gay, and student athletes as well. Russ, you had a little bit of a situation earlier in the year during the NCAA tournament. You were playing an opposing team, and in that situation, the last name of the player was King, and you had directed your players to refer to him as Queen. Later on, you apologized for that and mentioned that you obviously believe in diversity and inclusion, and that you want to do everything that you can to support that. Do you think that the ecosystem that men's basketball in particular exists in doesn't necessarily allow for as much diversity and inclusion, and maybe is a little bit overly masculine in certain ways?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing up the situation that I created in the NCAA tournament and allowing me to address it. That was a difficult situation that I created that I deeply regret, because what I did offended people, and I couldn't be more sorry for that. And I know that often learning is painful, and that's been my experience with this situation. And I think I'm going to be a better coach and leader as a result of it. But back to your question, there could be issues of inappropriate words or inappropriate ideas, I think. As coaches, we all know that our words matter, and we've all made mistakes by using words at times that have more impact than we realize, whether that's with our players or whether that's the situation I created with others who hear what we say and how we do it. I think as leaders, we have to be accountable for that. I think we have to work hard to improve. And what I realize is that biases and blind spots don't make me better. They keep me from being as good as I can be, and I think that's true for all coaches.
Do we, it seems like the issue of sexuality in particular is just something that coaches and programs in a lot of ways just choose to avoid talking about. We may talk about diversity, and because of that it becomes suppressed. Because it's a little bit more open and prevalent on the women's side of the business, do you have conversations with your student athletes? How do you kind of navigate that process of talking about sexuality? There are a lot of openly gay players in women's basketball, and that sometimes changes the dynamic of the team and the chemistry of the team sometimes. How have you kind of dealt with that in your career?
I don't know as much as dealt with as I'm pretty inclusive. We have a program at our university, Allies program, and so I have an Allies picture outside my door. I try to make sure that our student athletes, maybe who haven't come out yet, know that they've got a comfort zone with us. But for our players that have come out, or my coach's staff, it's just like anything else. If it's an open event that we have, I say, your significants are welcome, your girlfriends and boyfriends are welcome. When we talk about issues of dating violence, I talk about both sides. It's honestly really open for me in my program. My coaches are very much well aware, and I recruit the same way, so parents are aware. I really want to be able to be honest with our athletes and their families when they come to Texas State. They're going to know who they're getting, and so there aren't any surprises, and they're going to know that we're very inclusive and that their child's going to be welcome regardless, and that she's going to be playing with different types of people with all different types of backgrounds, including myself. And so, I really like that part of our game, that it's opening up a lot more. You're not finding as much of the negative recruiting regarding sexuality with coaching staffs. It's honestly been more inclusive, and I really work hard at being that change on our side and making sure that our athletes and our administration is aware that we're a very welcoming program.
Sure. Anthony and Russ, how have you kind of fostered diversity and inclusion on your teams? And also, Zenarae brings up the issues of dealing with things like sexual assault and being able to train student athletes. Obviously very important, particularly on the men's side. Anthony, what have you and UT Martin maybe done in that area?
Well, I'm honest, frank, above board, and up front. I don't dodge any issues, I don't dance unless I hear music. I don't scratch unless I itch. And so I'm not I'm unafraid to talk about issues that other people might be afraid to talk about. And so, but again, that goes back to my responsibility for their preparation in my 48 years on planet Earth that haven't always gone as I expected. It's different. I've always been in a situation through corporate America and now through athletics, I'm comfortable being uncomfortable, whether or not it was in transportation, which is a white male-dominated industry, always has been, trucking, transportation, or it's being the head coach of a predominantly white institution. I had some preparation to deal with the things that I deal with now. And so sharing my experiences with my student athletes, mentoring them, talking them through things. One of the things the first thing in my program when they come in that I make sure they're inclusive of is meaning, having meaning, being a voter, because if you don't vote, you don't even exist. And so small things of that nature in building up towards issues in college basketball, sexuality, violence, the way you conduct yourself, the way you're perceived, dealing with police, uncomfortable, quote unquote, hot topics, but we're going to talk about them.
Russ, go ahead.
I want to address if I can, a question about diversity and inclusion, because I think as head coaches, the best way we can promote those ideas is to live them, and our best opportunity is to have diverse teams and diverse staffs. And I take pride in the fact that I'm part of a university that's so diverse the way that UC Irvine is. My staff has included international coaches, has had religious diversity. Our team has had players from several different continents, Australia, Europe, Africa. And I love guys with stories. I love people with stories. That's what I look for when I bring people into our program, because I think we can benefit from those different sets of experience. So I try to live diversity and inclusion, and I think that's a great way we can be leaders.
Sure. To kind of wrap up the conversation here, we've covered a lot. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's emblematic of the fact that you as head coaches and public figures are seen as role models and expected to have all of the solutions and to be, in a lot of ways, people say, you know, perfect, right? You have to be the ones figuring it all out from the diversity and inclusion standpoint, from leading the way and everything. Do you think that there is maybe too much pressure on head coaches to be perfect in everything that they do and model certain behaviors that society expects us when we look at the news and it seems like everybody's trying to do something else? You go to one state and it's one thing, and you go to another state, it's in a completely other one. And yet everybody wants to have coaches that are universally perfect in many ways. What do we think about that?
Well, you know, that's an interesting question. And, you know, we, all three of us up here, we know what we signed up for. You know, we signed the contract.
Absolutely.
So you have to take what comes with it. You know, in a weird sort of way, Jason, I've never really considered myself like a quote-unquote basketball coach. You know, I'm a black man that happens to be coaching. There's an inherent difference with that. It's the way I live my life, the way you're going to address me, the way you're going to address my team. There's just a different deal with just being a basketball coach. And I'm never going to allow myself to be labeled a basketball coach. And so with that being said, there are just different things about me as a person and an individual as to where I'm going to try my best to live life how I see fit, to do right things right. Doesn't always work out that way. You know, I'm going to walk out this door and make a mistake today. I can promise you that. But I'm going to try to put my best foot forward, be a great example to my student athletes, and always try to represent my university with respect and class as best I can.
Zee?
I do think that's an interesting question, and as I think about it briefly, I don't know if there's an expectation for us to be perfect, but I know I put an expectation on myself to do the best I can. I wear a lot of different hats as a person, and one is a mom. And so when I do recruit these athletes, I really consider the fact that how would I want my child to be treated in what way, and what type of behavior do I want them to model. That's really important to me. And so as I go through, you know, this position of being a head coach, I really enjoy it, but also I'm definitely aware of the responsibilities, you know, that I have, and truly the responsibilities to me first is going to be to my athletes.
Sure. Russ?
Yeah, as Anthony said, we sign on for the pressure that we face, and I think that it's gotten greater. There are definitely more outlets for criticism to come our way, but those are also opportunities, especially as leaders for our players, because our players face that as much or more than we do for their performances. So what we have to show is our own adaptability and ability to respond to the adverse situations we inevitably create, because if you're out there as coaches and going at it the way we do, as competitively as we do, we're going to make mistakes. And that gives us an opportunity to respond well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Russ, Zenarae, Anthony, thank you for joining us. Spirited and insightful discussion.